We are just days away from Concacaf Nations League finals. So much to talk about with Oliver Platt and Gareth Wheeler. I am, of course, Adam Jenkins. Andy Petrillo is not here because we have sent her to Las Vegas to shoot the next edition of the Hangover series and then maybe catch the Canada-Panama semifinal on Thursday. That's where we will begin today, gentlemen, and let's talk about it. There was a big bit of sound coming out of the president of CONCACAF last night, Victor Montagliani, who had joined Andy and Jordan on One Nation to preview the tournament, get a bit of a state of the union on all things CONCACAF, and questions like, should they be the favorites of this tournament were asked. And when Andy asked that question to the vice president of FIFA, he had this to say.
I do want to also just kind of end here a little bit with just Canada's reputation. Obviously, they've been dubbed, right, the kings of CONCACAF because of what they did in World Cup qualifying. Now they're going to, though, right, try to put the crown on their head here, right, with getting a trophy for the first time in 23 years. Do you think Canada, though, is getting the respect outside of CONCACAF and, you know, the region itself? Where do you also want to see it grow to get that respect on the global stage, too?
Yeah, listen, I think I think it's a bit of a Canadian trait. We think we're there before we're actually there. I think sometimes I think we need to put the pom poms down a little bit. To be quite frank with you, it was great that we qualified for the Men's World Cup. Maybe it wasn't, it was a great experience there, but also a lot of lessons learned there. Obviously, we have some world class talent in our mix. Kings of CONCACAF. I'm not sure that's really appropriate. You want World Cup qualifying. Well, you don't win anything. You just qualify for the World Cup. I know it's used as a branding mechanism, but if you want to be Kings of CONCACAF, you got to win the Gold Cup. You got to win the Nations League. You have to have sustained success, not for 2 years, but for 20 years, like Mexico and the U.S. has had. Then we could start giving ourselves some titles. But, I think it's time we just focus on the football, focus on getting results. We have the talent to be Kings of CONCACAF. That is without an absolute doubt. But we need to have some victories, some trophies, and some sustainability here. So, this is not about what happened in 22. This is what's going to happen between 23 and 30. We have a very unbelievable generation of players. They're not just great players, but I know most of them personally. They're great men on and off the field. And they have a real opportunity of changing the vernacular when it comes to when people speak about Canadian football. And I think, and I hope that the success on the field will lead to that. But I think we need to be a little bit more focused and a little bit more disciplined in our approach and learn from other countries in the world that have had very sustained success, even in CONCACAF. With all due respect, Costa Rica has had sustained success, and so has obviously U.S. and Mexico. And when we start getting to that sustainability, I think that's when we can start using those words.
Well, as a big fan of pom-poms, I was taken aback by that comment from Victor Montagliani. Ollie, what did you make of his frankness on the matter?
He's preaching to the choir. I totally agree with him. Like, I think, look, there's one thing to celebrate a great accomplishment of qualifying for the World Cup and going through qualifying like Canada did. But at some point, we've got to say that was great. We celebrated that. Now comes the real part. Now comes the really difficult part, which is sustaining this over a longer period of time. It's winning trophies like the Nations League, like the Gold Cup. It's going to a World Cup and being competitive like the United States and Mexico have consistently been over the years. It's going to a tournament like the Copa America and showing that you can hang with those types of teams as well. And more broadly than that, than just the individual kind of specific tournaments, it's as a country acting like a big football country in terms of the organization of the game, in terms of, the funding of the game, the resources that are available, continuing to grow that side of it, where quite frankly, Canada is still, right on the first or second rung of the ladder when it comes to really establishing itself in the world game. So I think that was, those comments were quite, the fact that you referenced Kings of CONCACAF specifically, that's not something that like a player has come out and said. That's something that's going in Canada Soccer press releases. And I think that was probably quite, pointed in the sense that as a country, we still have a long way to go here. So it's fine to celebrate the accomplishments, and we have done that. But now it's about really sustaining this and taking advantage of what we actually have here. And that is the really difficult bit, and a bit where when you look at the way things have been going over the past few months off the pitch, we don't seem to be all that serious about actually going after and tackling right now. And that needs to change and change quickly.
Kings of Sustainability just doesn't have the same ring to it, does it? Like, it's just not as catchy. I agree and I'll disagree. First of all, I'll provide the counter argument to that. I watch enough Game of Thrones in my life to understand whoever won the last battle is then crowned the victor. And right now, in the last major competition, where Canada did win World Cup qualifying, win that round, 14 games. It was a grind through a pandemic. The odds were stacked against them. They came out on top. And that's good enough for me, for them to be kings of the moment. I mean, if you're going to build something going forward, obviously that's the goal. That's what you want to achieve. And part of that is going out and winning an actual trophy. And that's what this next month is about. Try to win a trophy at either one of these tournaments, then you can rubber stamp it. And I have no problem acknowledging that. Yeah, it's not mission accomplished. It's not like George W. Bush with the mission accomplished banner behind. But I would argue that in the mindset of Canadians, that qualifying for the World Cup is more important than going out and winning one of these tournaments. Still, the Gold Cup isn't a big household name in terms of a tournament for the Canadian public. The Nations League, many people are still asking what that is. So the main goal was to qualify for the World Cup, and doing so in that kind of way, I think it means something. And just to counter it as well, I don't think there's anything wrong with puffing on our chest and acknowledging some soccer achievements on the men's side of the equation in this country. I think that everyone needs it. Everyone needs to be galvanized. So if you have a catchy catchphrase like Kings of Concacaf put behind it, then so be it. Start building credibility within our borders. I think all these things are important in order to build that sustainability, build that interest, and try to make sure that this isn't just a one-off. So again, I agree and disagree, but I have no problem with the phrase.
I'll add that for every dealing that we as OneSoccer have had with Victor, he has been very quick to remind everyone that he is a proud Canadian. You can tell he still uses words like we, and he wants to see them succeed. But also in his office, in his position, he is dealing with nations who have been the best countries in CONCACAF for a very long time. And he has to remind everyone that their history does exist as well. And from that history, we have to move along to the CONCACAF Nations League, which is just a couple of days away. The finals will begin. And this is where you can put the cart before the horse if you're a Canadian football supporter and think, well, we're 2 matches away from winning a trophy. Canada or the US is just on the other side of Panama. Let's not forget that Panama is a good footballing nation here, and that match has to be won before you can consider playing for a trophy. When you think about the matches, and let's start with Panama in particular, Gareth, what are your expectations, and do you think it's should win, must win for Canada, and a final is the minimum expectation here?
Yeah, I think it's somewhere in between. Definitely should win. Is this a must-win tournament for Canada? I'd like to think that the team and the public are approaching it that way. You're right. Like, Panama's no slouch, but they don't have the resources or the squads that the United States and Mexico do. So this is the best path going forward. But you're right, Adam. It doesn't mean that they're a team to be taken lightly. They're undefeated in their last 11 games. Dating back to the end of qualifying, where they did beat Canada in that final or that final away match, or that final game of qualifying against Canada. They beat them 1-0. And since that time, they played competitive football against Saudi Arabia, which proved to be a decent World Cup side. Cameroon, they've had some pretty decent results. So they're a young and very emerging team. Scouts that I talk to in this region are really high, where Thomas Christensen's taken this program and some of the young players that are coming through. So it's going to be a tricky one, but it's one that Canada will be going into as favorites, if not significant favorites, and one that they should feel comfortable that if they play to their ability, they should be able to come away from this match unscathed. So it's a tough one, but this is the preferable path through this tournament. And that's why they say, like, the Nations League, that's why the big dogs for Canada are playing in this tournament, because you'll take 2 games versus having to navigate your way through an entire tournament come next month. So this is the tournament to win for me, and you can make a statement out of the gate in what could be just a massive month for Canadian football.
Yeah, it's quite simple for me. If you're not coming home with the trophy, then you're coming home disappointed. Like, I think we're at that stage with Canada now, and look, it's not to be ridiculous about it and say if they don't win this tournament, everyone's going to be saying, "Oh, this team sucks" and Herdman out and all of that stuff. Obviously, we're not saying that, but like none of the teams that Canada are going to face or potentially face at this tournament are at the absolute peak of their powers right now. Obviously, most relevantly, the US and Mexico. Mexico have a new coach. The US don't have a coach. Tyler Adams is missing for the United States. Like, it's not, but you're not going to get a better opportunity than this with a relatively settled Canada side, not a perfect Canada side. We have our own weaknesses and question marks, but the star players are here. John Herdman is still here. It's the same team that was, again, we use the phrase kings of CONCACAF through qualifying, beat all of these teams at some point over the past couple of years. Like, this is a major opportunity in front of Canada to win a trophy here. And if they don't do it, they're absolutely going to be disappointed, coming out of this tournament. Panama's a decent team. I think particularly coming, into the game without many training sessions, Panama's been in camp and has had a friendly a little bit longer. And then also looking at the games that Canada played against Panama in World Cup qualifying, those were two complicated games. They lost the last one, obviously, which was a bit of a dead rubber for Canada. But even the home game, which ended 4-1 and seems comfortable when you look back at it on paper, it wasn't. It was a difficult game that was broken open by a moment of pure brilliance from Alphonso Davies that then led Canada to win the game comfortably. But for an hour, at home at BMO Fields, Canada were finding that game really challenging. So I don't think this is going to be an easy match by any means. But you have the quality on the pitch, you have the proven results through qualifying again against these teams that you've got to overcome those kinds of hurdles and potential problems and win these games. If they don't, I think they'll see it as a massive missed opportunity.
Well, use the friendly that you mentioned, Ollie, that Panama just played against Nicaragua for a little bit of CONCACAF news that came out at, I think, 11:30 p.m. Eastern time last night. Their opponent in that friendly had been Nicaragua, and Nicaragua has actually been banned from participating in the Gold Cup for fielding an ineligible player in 8 national team matches. And that is good news if you are a fan of Trinidad and Tobago, because all of a sudden they have been invited to the big dance, and Nicaragua has been sent down to Nations League B for the following campaign.
TNT, they're dynamite.
Maybe we'll see Andre Rampersad in the Gold Cup after all.
It's actually a little bit of a shame, I think, because Trinidad might well have been in Canada's group through the preliminaries, and they would have played Canada at BMO Fields. And if that is I don't know, but if that was to be Atiba's last game in Canada, it would have been against the nation of his parents' birth, which would have been quite nice. But anyway.
Would have been. That is our CONCACAF news dump from 11:30 p.m.
Sentimental Oliver Platt. At least the news dump wasn't done on Friday evening or Friday night. That seems to be the time where everyone likes to just drop the bad news. So I respect Monday as a choice.
The time, no. The date, yes. Ollie, let's talk about Panama a little bit more from the Canadian perspective. I want to know how you think John Herdman will be lining up the boys in Las Vegas.
Well, our good friend over on the digital team, Josh, posted this on Twitter. We're going to put this line up, I think, here. And we've just stolen it because it's the same team as I would pick. I think this
copier.
is... Look,
plagiarism.
I am copying, and why not? Like, why make our own graphic when this one looks so nice? I think there's a couple of question marks here. I think there would have been one in defense if Derek Cornelius was fit. Maybe Scott Kennedy comes into the picture still in that mix as well, but I think that'll be the 3 he goes with. Then you look at probably a couple of the players who you're questioning whether they're fully fit, right? Jonathan Osorio, Alphonso Davies, coming off injuries. Osorio played at the weekends. Davies hasn't played in nearly 2 months. Will they go with both of those two in the team? Will they find a way to get Richie Larea, who has been Toronto FC's best player and is fully fit and in form? Will they find a way to get him in the team, whether that means pushing Davies further forward or not starting Davies? I don't know. There's also obviously the same question with Osorio with some of the other midfield options, including someone like David Wallace-Spoon. So that's probably where the question marks are. But for me, on paper right now, that looks like Canada's strongest side.
I'll add another question mark. I think there's a chance that Scott Kennedy could go. I thought he did really well in the previous window. He could replace Kamal Miller in that starting 11 on the left side of center back. I think that's realistic. Ollie mentions the fact that Davies and Buchanan haven't played. Davies seems a little bit more confident, at least publicly speaking, in some of the interviews he's done. He hasn't played since April 22nd. Tajon Buchanan hasn't played competitive football since April 7th. That's quite some time. And I think that Larea argument is one to be made. I think that Larea is in the form of his life right now. I think it was a player that in the build up to the World Cup, having not really played at Nottingham Forest, coming back to a bad TFC team, I don't think he was in a great state. But right now, I mean, the guy is just playing out of his skin. The other one also, so perhaps there's 3 potential changes in
More
this
question
team.
marks.
Jonathan Osorio is just coming back from injury. Does Atiba or someone else make their way into central midfield as well? We'll see about that. But I think that just those 3 positions would be the ones that I'm keeping my eye on. But I think that's the formation. That's the way to approach things if you're Herdman in Canada in this competition.
Ollie, you had a big grin. You were sitting on a joke.
I did mention Kennedy and Osorio. It's like wheels tuned out of my entire spiel there.
I did notice that too.
I
Hey,
was just providing a little bit more confidence than you. You said no changes. That was your 11, so I dug in a little bit deeper.
Okay, Gareth. Let's keep talking about some strengths.
Oracle
here.
Oliver. I'll just bow down to every word.
The Oracle and his crystal ball and wizard
breath.
hat. With whatever team John Herdman decides to pick, Gareth, what do you think Canada's biggest strength is at the moment?
Athleticism, the ability to press, the ability to just kind of stymie another team's attack. That was their biggest strength at the World Cup, was denying progression of the other team in terms of their defensive play. When they press high and force mistakes, I just don't think that there's anyone better in this region. They're better than the US at that. They're better than Mexico in that. And up top right now, I mean, neither one of them had the impact at the World Cup that you would have expected. But Jonathan David, Kyle Larin leading the line, that's dynamite. Add in the quality from wide areas, which again, I think is a position that Canada is better than anyone else in this region. Then those are some definable elements where I think they have an advantage on every team that they'll play, whether it's now or in the Gold Cup. At wide, up top, athleticism, pressing, these are all huge attributes that play in Canada's favor. Like the U.S. have Balogun, they have Pulisic, they have Weah in attack. Santiago Jimenez has had a great season for Feyenoord for Mexico. They have some very good strikers as well, but I just take Canada's players in those areas. It's just remarkable. One of the reasons why they wear the crown, Adam Jenkins.
Oh dear. It depends on who you ask, Gareth. One of my favorite things about that entire segment is we went through strengths and nobody mentioned Stefan Eustáquio, who's just like, he's fantastic and he's there. Don't forget about him too. On the other side of the coin, Ollie, when you think about potential reasons not to be fully optimistic, or at least have a bit of caution when approaching Panama, where do the weaknesses lie in Canada right now?
Well, I'll get on to Eustáquio here because unfortunately he can't do everything. And the big question mark for me is how much help he's going to get in central midfield. Ismail Kone obviously has been a great story and is playing exceptionally well. So that makes you feel better about that situation. But I think in an ideal world, when I look at, the top international teams, particularly in tournaments, you need 2 players at the base of midfield who are capable of controlling the game, playing in a responsible way, being defensively very solid as well as good on the ball. And I think the question is whether someone like Kone, who is probably going to be thrust into that role, is going to have the discipline to do that in big moments in a semi-final and in a final. He has the quality. There's no question about that. He's a brilliant young player, really intelligent, really technical. But it's just the experience, again, to make the right decision in those moments. Eustáquio, you'll be fine with. He's as good as anyone in this region. But I think that's why, John Herdman was obviously so keen to add someone like Aidan Morris, who, although he is a very young player himself and hasn't necessarily played at a level like this, he is more in that kind of mold of being a bit more of a defensively minded player than Kone is. Kone, I think you want to let go and give some freedom. So I think Kone and Eustáquio's ability to hold it down in that area of the pitch, the ability to find a third player to join them, whether it's Osorio, whether it's someone else who's fit and ready to contribute. That area of the pitch for me, when you're going up against, again, particularly if it's the US in the final with some of the quality they've got in midfields, controlling that midfield area, which was obviously a problem at the World Cup. That to me is the big question mark. And I should mention that Atiba Hutchinson is a great solution, but he's another one who, again, has barely played any football over the past few months, and you just don't know what condition he's going to be in coming into these games. So that's the big question mark for me for Canada.
Biggest question mark for me is the way that Canada defend in and around their own area. They were a bottom 5 team at the World Cup. In doing so, they gave up over 3 more goals than expected at the World Cup as well. And some of those just were like goals that kind of come out of nothing. And that's why one of the other strengths of this Canadian men's national team is John Herdman and the coaching staff. And that's why I think it actually makes sense to bring in 2 new voices at the back and Richard Shaw and Phil Neville and allow them to dig in and try to improve some of those areas. That was the biggest reason why Canada did not, come away with a win or points at the World Cup, was defending in and around their own area. So that's the area that requires improvement.
So on Panama, Gareth, go right back to you. We had mentioned earlier the friendly that they played against Nicaragua. You could add to the list of potential weaknesses is just team form or team continuity right now, because it has been some time since we've seen Canada play together as the men's national team, despite the various individual successes we have seen. How much of an advantage does that friendly against Nicaragua give Panama, if at all, Gareth?
I don't think much, if any. I know that this is something that Herdman spoke publicly about, that the U.S. were in camp for a week and that Mexico's played 2 games and Panama's played a game. Well, Mexico's played 5 games under their new manager, Diego Coca, and BJ Callahan. Who? I mean,
Gareth,
they need to no, but he's never managed at this level. These are brand new people that are in charge of programs where there's all kinds of pressure, and that really surprises me about those nations. I think Thomas Christensen's a good manager. They played Nicaragua, but it was kind of like it wasn't anywhere close to their preferred 11 starting that game. Some players that they will play did come in off the bench in that game. How much can you gain? I'm not quite sure. At the end of a long season as well, I think it's actually a benefit for some of these players who have been playing a lot of football overseas to have that little bit of extra time off to freshen up, then come into camp. Canada's done these quick turnarounds as well. In fact, they mastered it over the course of World Cup qualifying and everything that they've done. And in an ideal world, you want an extended camp, but I just don't think it's necessary this time around. So I think they're okay. So I don't think there's going to be any pronounced advantage.
Oliver?
I mean, I think all of these things are factors that you have to take into consideration if you're John Herdman when you're game planning and, understanding that the team might not come flying out of the blocks, but ultimately Canada just has more quality on paper than Panama. Like, good teams find a way to overcome little individual factors like this. And I think that should be the case for Canada in this game. Like I said earlier, it's not going to be an easy game, and Panama, Wheels is right. Thomas Christensen's done a really good job there and made them they look like they were going to at least the intercontinental playoff for a good portion of World Cup qualifying. So it's not going to be an easy or straightforward match. But ultimately, if you believe you can win this trophy, you've got to be able to overcome hurdles like this.
Yeah, I mean, Panama beat Costa Rica twice to qualify for this tournament. I mean, winning away 1-0, that's tough at Costa Rica. So should be a good competition. Playing in Vegas, big stadium, big crowd. Take away some of the elements of CONCACAF or of Central America within this tournament. I still think it plays in Canada's favor pretty nicely.